Listen closely, and you will hear it, not in the loud stories of kings and battles, but in the quiet places where a single candle trembles and a secret thought feels louder than a bell. If you have carried a busy mind all day, let this story be your slow exhale. If you enjoy drifting through history like this, please tap like and subscribe to the channel so you can return whenever you want, a calmer head and a softer night. Let your shoulders drop, let your hands rest heavy. Unclench your jaw and soften your brow. Take one gentle breath in through your nose and then let it go slowly. Imagine the room around you growing a little dimmer and safer with each breath. Tonight we will step into medieval life at its quietest, where rules were strict, words were careful, and desire was treated like a secret fire that could either warm you or burn you. We will not rush. We will walk slowly, listening for small sounds, because in the Middle Ages the smallest sounds often meant the most. In the distance you can almost hear a bell. Not loud, not sharp, just steady, as if it is guiding us into a different time. People then did not speak openly about sex the way many people do now, yet they spoke about temptation and sin constantly, because they believed the body could pull the soul off its path. That belief shaped prayers, punishments, love poems, jokes, court cases, and the private fears people carried to bed. Do not worry about memorizing dates or names tonight. Let the details wash over you like warm water, and keep only the feeling of moving through another world. When a thought wanders, just notice it and let it drift back, the way a leaf drifts back toward a quiet shore. By the end of this journey, you will understand why medieval people both feared desire and used it to tell stories about faith. Honor and power begin in a monastery, not a tavern, not a feast, but a place built for silence. The walls are thick, the stones cool even in summer, and the air smells of candle wax, damp murta, and dried herbs tied in bundles. Every sound travels down the corridors. A cough feels like thunder, and a dropped spoon feels like a sin. Men move through shadowed hallways in heavy wool robes, their heads shaved in a circle, the tonsure like a pale moon. They wake before dawn, wash in cold water, and file into the chapel while the sky is still black. Latin chants rise and fall like slow waves. Their food is plain, their work is hard, and their days repeat like beads on a rosary. The goal is simple. At least on paper, keep the body quiet so the mind can reach heaven. And yet the body does not vanish just because a rule is written. It waits. It breathes. It remembers warmth. Brother Thomas stands in the chapel during Mass, eyes lowered to the stone floor, trying to focus on the words. Behind a wooden screen, a small group from a nearby convent has come to sing. He tells himself not to look for any one face. He looks anyway. Sister Agnes is there, hands folded, rosary wrapped tight around her fingers. Her veil hides most of her hair, but not the curve of her cheek when she turns to breathe between verses. In Brother Thomas's chest, something small and hot wakes up, like a coal beneath ash. He swallows, forces his gaze down, and tries to pray harder. If you have ever tried to push a thought away, you know how it returns, stronger and more vivid, as if your mind is testing you. Medieval monks wrote about this inner battle with exhausting honesty. They believed lust was not only a private feeling, but an enemy that prowled in the dark, and that even a sinful thought could stain the soul. because they believed that. They watched themselves with relentless care. They watched their dreams. They watched their bodies for signs of betrayal. They watched for the moment when a harmless memory became a lingering picture. In the confession manuals used by priests, the questions could be uncomfortably detailed. Did you touch yourself? Did you enjoy it? Did you picture someone? Did you linger on the feeling after you woke? In some monasteries, men confessed in careful phrases, speaking of accidents and stains, as if naming the act directly would give it extra power. Penances were practical and severe, extra fasting, more prayers, cold baths, sleeping without a blanket, working longer hours. The logic was clear to them: chill the body, tire the mind, and the fire will dim. Sometimes it did dim, and sometimes it did not. After sunrise, there is work in the garden, work in the kitchen, and for the educated men, long hours in the scriptorium, there, under small windows. They copy texts letter by letter, and the scratch of the quill becomes a kind of breathing. Ink stains their fingertips, and candle smoke curls above the desks. Sometimes a monk paints a bright initial in red or blue, and for a moment the page looks like a tiny doorway into beauty. Even in those careful books, you can find little signs of a restless mind. In the margins of some manuscripts, a bored hand drew faces, animals, and jokes, as if laughter was another forbidden warmth. Rules tried to shape every hour. Silence at certain times. Confession at certain time. And always the demand to guard the eyes and guard the tongue. The senior monk might remind the younger ones that looking too long at a woman could plant a picture that would return at night. He might say it as calmly as he spoke about weeds in the garden. Brother Thomas hears those warnings, and he tries to obey them. But he is young, and his imagination is quick, and the memory of a cheek lit by candlelight keeps returning. In his cell, he whispers prayers, not only to praise God, but to drown out his own mind. He repeats the same lines again and again, hoping the rhythm will calm his pulse. Some men used practical tricks. They slept with their arms outside the blanket so the cold would keep them awake. They kept a rough rope or a strap beside the bed to bite the skin and break a rising fantasy. Others went outside and stood barefoot on stone until the chill made their teeth ache. Not everyone did these things, and not every story is true. But the impulse behind them is easy to recognize. It is the impulse to control what feels uncontrollable. During confession, Brother Thomas kneels and speaks softly, because even the sound of his own voice feels dangerous. The priest listens without surprise, because he has heard the same fears in many men. He gives a penance measured in days and prayers, like a medicine with a bitter taste. Brother Thomas accepts it because he wants to be clean, and because he does not know any other way to be human here. Some confession books also asked about dreams, because sleep was seen as a doorway that the devil could use. If a man woke aroused, or if his clothing was wet, the community might treat it as a moral problem, even when the man had not chosen it. Monks debated this in serious tones, trying to decide where fault began and where nature ended. The debate itself shows how hard they worked to fit real bodies into strict ideals. Older monks sometimes offered blunt advice: eat less at supper, avoid spicy food, do not drink too much ale, and keep the body cold. They spoke of the stomach as if it were a bellows feeding the fire of lust. Brother Thomas follows the advice, but the mind has its own hunger, and hunger can grow sharper when it is denied. On some evenings, he hears laughter from the kitchen, and for a second he imagines the warmth of a family home, a wife, a child, and a life where a touch is not a crime. He quickly labels the thought as temptation, but the thought has already left its mark. Another night, he sees a carving on a choir stall, a tiny figure hidden in wood, a rude little joke made by some long-forgotten craftsman. He blushes, half amused and half ashamed, because even sacred buildings could not resist a wink at the body. In moments like that, the medieval world feels close to ours, because humor and desire are stubborn companions. Night in the monastery is not empty, it is simply quieter. In the dormitory, beds sit close together, and there is no true privacy, only darkness and the endless space inside the mind. A man turns on straw, hears another man breathe, and tries to keep his thoughts in neat lines. But dreams do not follow rules. Some wake with a racing heart, ashamed of what their sleeping mind has invented. Others wake with a strange sadness, because the dream felt like comfort and then vanished. In convents, women describe temptations in safer language. A demon came in the night, they wrote, or a shadow pressed close, or a dark visitor whispered sweet promises. To name it a demon was to shift the blame, and to admit the body without saying, I want. The church could fight a demon. A community could pray against a demon. A woman could confess a demon and still be seen as faithful. Behind the holy words, though, you can hear the simple truth that bodies did not stop being bodies. Even in strict communities, there were glances in corridors, notes tucked into prayer books, hands held too long when passing bread, and visits that were explained away as spiritual counsel. Officials investigated scandals now and then, closing houses that had become too tangled, and writing letters full of disappointment and warning. Those letters sound harsh, but they also reveal something. Human isolation does not erase desire, and sometimes it sharpens it. Stand in the courtyard now, feeling cool air on your face, and listen to the evening chant curling upward. You might feel awe at the discipline, and also sorrow at the weight of fear these people carried. They were taught that even thinking about desire could lead to hell, and that the safest heart was the one that felt nothing at all. Yet desire kept flickering, small and stubborn, like a candle that refuses to go out. We will leave the monastery gate and follow the narrow road under moonlight into a wider world, where visions of saints mix devotion with longing, where castles turn love into performance, and where ordinary homes share beds because there is no other choice. For now, the road is gentle beneath your feet, and the night is wide, and we keep walking into the next chapter. Beyond these walls, the road leads to towns and markets where people are less silent, but no less careful. Everyone lives under the gaze of neighbors, and reputation is like a fragile glass cup that can shatter with one rumor. We will meet lovers who try to hide in plain sight, and spouses who suspect, and priests who question, and judges who punish. But for tonight, keep your pace slow, as if your feet are wrapped in cloth to muffle every step. Let the moonlight on the road feel smooth and silver. Let the distant barking of a dog fade into the background. Let your own breathing be the steady sound that guides you forward. In a moment, the monastery will be behind us, and the next scene will open like a door into candle-lit castles and whispered vows. For now, let everything stay gentle. So the road from the monastery runs between hedges and bare winter fields, and the moon makes the puddles look like small mirrors. You can imagine your steps quiet on packed earth, the kind of road that has carried carts, pilgrims, and gossip for centuries. Once you leave the cloister, the medieval world feels louder, but it is still careful about desire. People do not only fear sin, they fear what their neighbors might say, and what a lord or priest might do with a rumor. In towns, bells set the rhythm of the day, and market stalls fill the air with the smells of onions, smoke, wool, and animal hide. At the edge of a square, a priest hears confession in a wooden booth, and the line of people waiting looks ordinary, almost boring, until you remember what they are waiting to admit. Some come to confess anger or theft. Others come with quieter problems that make them stare at the ground, because the body is involved and the shame is heavier. Medieval priests relied on handbooks, lists of questions, and matching penances, as if human behavior could be managed like a ledger. Those books did not treat sex as a private preference. They treated it as a moral map with dangerous cliffs. They asked about adultery, about fornication, about what happened in marriage beds, and even about thoughts that never reached action. In that world, the law of God, the law of the church, and the law of the community pressed down together, making even small desires feel risky. Between the monastery and the market town, there are shrines by the roadside, small wooden crosses, and painted images of saints. Travelers stop, touch the wood, and whisper hopes that are both spiritual and practical. Keep my child alive, keep my crops safe, keep my marriage peaceful. Medieval faith was not only a Sunday activity, it was woven into every fear and every desire. That is why stories of saints could sound surprisingly intimate. Some holy women wrote about Christ as a bridegroom, describing a spiritual wedding ring, a kiss of peace, a presence in the bedchamber of the heart. The words were meant to be pure, yet they borrowed the language of romance, because romance was the strongest language people had for closeness. Listeners could be comforted by those images and also quietly stirred by them, without anyone naming what they felt. At the same time, sermons warned that the devil could imitate sweetness, and that not every warm feeling was holy. So even devotion could become a site of suspicion, a place where a person wondered, is this grace, or is this my body talking? When you hold two ideas at once like that, faith and fear, it can make the nights long. Step into an ordinary house after sunset. The room is one space, smoky and warm near the hearth, cold near the door, a portsumus, and the walls hold the smell of last week's stew. There might be a bench, archest, a rough table, and straw on the floor. In many homes, especially among the poor, several people share a bed, not for romance, but for warmth, because cloth is expensive and winter bites. A husband, a wife, a child, perhaps an elderly parent, all pressed close in the dark, breathing in the same small pocket of heat. Privacy, as we imagine it, hardly exists. And because privacy is scarce, The community pays attention to what happens between men and women. A couple that fights too loudly becomes public entertainment. A woman who becomes pregnant too soon after a husband's death becomes a subject of suspicion. A man who visits the wrong doorway at night becomes a target for jokes and sometimes for violence. In this setting, desire has to move carefully. It can be ordinary and gentle, like a married couple finding comfort after a long day. It can also be desperate, like a servant and a soldier stealing a moment behind a barn. Church teaching insisted that sex was allowed only inside marriage. And even there, it came with rules about purpose and posture and holy seasons. Some people tried to follow those rules. Others treated them like the weather, something you complain about while doing what you have to do. And then there were the people at the top of society, the nobles, who invented a different way to talk about desire, a language that sounded elegant and safe. In their halls, love became a performance, wrapped in poetry, music, and manners. It was called courtly love, and it often praised longing more than fulfillment. A knight might swear service to a lady who was already married. He might wear her colours, fight for her honour, and write verses about her smile as if it were a sacred relic. On the surface, it looked refined. Underneath, it could be a training ground for real affairs and real danger. Marriage itself was treated as both sacred and political. A wedding could be joyful, with music and bread and laughter, but it could also be a transaction, a way to bind families, move property, and secure labor. Once married, couples were expected to behave in ways that made sense to the church and to the village. There were rules about holy days when sex was forbidden, rules about fasting seasons, and rules about what counted as a proper act between spouses. Not everyone followed the rules, but the rules mattered because they gave priests and neighbors a vocabulary to judge you. If a couple was suspected of breaking norms, a church court might call them in, question them, and assign penance. Sometimes the punishment was private, but sometimes it was public, because public shame was thought to teach the whole community. In some places, neighbors staged loud mock processions for suspected adulterers, banging pots and making jokes, turning private pain into noise. It is a cruel custom, but it shows how tightly sexuality was tied to social order. A woman's reputation could decide whether she had protection or danger. A man's reputation could decide whether he had trust or ridicule. Even when love was real, it had to survive the pressure of eyes and whispers. Still, people kept falling in love, because falling in love is not something you can ban with a calendar. Young people met at wells and at church doors. They traded small gifts, an apple, a ribbon, a carved token. They found privacy where they could, behind a hedgerow, in a doorway, in the pause between errands. Sometimes they married quickly. Sometimes they were separated by class or money and had to accept a different future. And sometimes, when the gap between desire and reality became too wide, they broke rules on purpose and hoped the world would not notice. That hope was risky in a village. It could be even riskier in a castle. Church law also cared about consent. A marriage was supposed to require a spoken yes. Yet families pushed and pressured until yes felt like the only safe word to say. Some couples tried to marry in secret, exchanging vows without witnesses, then arguing later when families denied it happened. Priests preached against secret unions, but secret unions kept happening because young people wanted control over their own lives. In court records, you can even find cases where spouses complained that a marriage bed was cold, that a partner could not perform, or that affection never arrived. Those are not romantic documents, but they remind you that medieval people worried about intimacy the way people always have. Behind the moral language, there is a very ordinary wish to be wanted, to be safe, to be held without fear. Picture a castle hall on a cold evening. Rushes cover the floor, torches smoke against stone, and a fire snaps in the hearth. A noblewoman, Lady Ellen, sits with other women on a raised platform, her sleeves long, her hair covered, her jewelry catching the light. Below, young men talk too loudly, eager to be seen, and an older lord watches them with the tired eyes of someone who has survived many winters. A minstrel begins to sing, and the song is about longing, about a love that hurts but also makes life feel brighter. A young squire named Martin listens as if the words are meant for him alone. His gaze drifts toward Lady Ellen, and he tells himself it is only admiration, only the polite game of the court. But then Lady Ellen looks down at the same moment, and their eyes meet. It lasts a breath, maybe less, but it is enough to plant a seed. Afterward, Martin finds excuses to be near her, carrying messages, bringing a cloak, offering a cup, doing every small service with too much care. Lady Ellen is clever and lonely. Her marriage was arranged for land and alliance, not for tenderness. She has learned to smile on command, to speak softly in public, and to swallow her own wants like medicine. Martin's attention feels like warmth, and warmth is hard to refuse. At first, it is only glances, then a folded note slipped under a book, then a meeting in a stairwell where the air smells of cold stone and perfume. Nothing obvious happens, and that is part of what makes it thrilling. They can tell themselves it is still only a game, still only words. But words are not harmless. Not here. In a castle, every servant has eyes, and every corridor has echoes. One small mistake can turn a private feeling into a public weapon. In noble households, marriage was often the least romantic part of life. A lady might be promised while still a child, then sent to a new home to learn manners and obedience. Her husband might be older, or simply distant, busy with hunting, war, debts, and alliances. She might be surrounded by people all day and still feel alone, because none of those people were truly hers. That loneliness created space for fantasies, and courtly songs offered fantasies with nice clothing. They said that longing made you noble, that suffering for love refined the soul, that a lady's favor could turn a boy into a man. Sometimes the songs were only songs. Sometimes they were invitations. Martin has heard them since he was small, and he wants to live inside one. Lady Ellen hears them too, and she smiles as if the words are harmless. But inside she feels something loosen, something she has held tight for years. The first note Martin slips to her is careful. It calls her virtuous and bright and says he would serve her in all things. It does not ask for a meeting, and that is why it is dangerous, because it leaves room for imagination. Lady Ellen folds it once, then twice, then hides it in a sewing box as if it were a needle. She tells herself she will forget it. That night, in her chamber, she cannot. The castle is quiet, except for the wind under the eaves and the soft steps of a guard. She lies awake, thinking of a glance that lasted a breath, and the thought feels like warmth moving through cold cloth. The next day, she returns the game with a single word spoken too softly in a corridor. Enough to encourage him, enough to make him bolder. They begin to meet where they can pretend it is accidental near the chapel door, by the stair, beside the pantry. They never touch in daylight, but their hands hover too close, and in this world that can be worse than a kiss, because it promises what has not happened yet. A chaplain notices Martin lingering. A steward notices Lady Helene smiling when she thinks she is unseen. A maid notices, because maids notice everything. Each person who notices has a choice: stay silent, or speak, or trade the information for advantage. In castles, secrets are currency. The scrap of parchment the maid finds is not a love letter in full. Only a line, but it is enough. It proves that Martin's feelings have become ink, and ink can be carried from hand to hand. She takes it to the steward's wife first, hoping for a reward. The steward's wife takes it to the steward, because she wants security. The steward takes it to the Lord's advisor, because he wants power. By the time the paper reaches the Lord's private table, it has already grown in size inside people's minds. And when Lord Renaud reads it, his face does not show anger at first. It shows calculation. He thinks of alliances, dowries, and the shame that could weaken him at court. He thinks of how a scandal can be used to control a woman and punish a young man. He folds the scrap and places it beneath a cup as if it were nothing. Then he calls for Martin, not loudly, not with shouting, but with the quiet tone that makes a servant's stomach drop. Martin walks toward the Lord's chamber, believing he is being summoned for some ordinary task, and that belief is the last calm moment of his old life. This is the point where a private longing becomes a threat, and the story steps through a door it cannot close again. Keep breathing slowly as we watch Martin reach the Lord's door, because what happens next will pull us deeper into the medieval rules of love, shame, and power in the quiet torchlight. Just a moment. The Lord's chamber is warm with firelight, but the warmth does not comfort. It feels like heat trapped under a lid. Martin steps inside and sees Lord Renaud seated at a table, a cup of wine untouched, a candle burning low beside a small folded scrap of parchment. The Lord does not shout. He does not need to. His voice is quiet, and in a castle, quiet can be more dangerous than thunder. Martin bows. His mouth is dry. Lord Renaud studies him the way a hunter studies tracks in snow. Patient, certain, almost bored. Then he taps the parchment once with a finger. This fell into my hands. He says, "Tell me what it means." Martin feels the room tilt. He thinks of Lady Helene's face, the corridor, the half smile that promised nothing and everything. He could lie. He could beg. He could pretend it is a joke. But the castle is full of ears, and the Lord's eyes make it clear the story has already been told by other mouths. So Martin chooses the only remaining power he has. He speaks with care. "My lord," he says, "I meant no harm. I let my thoughts wander. I wrote foolish words. I ask forgiveness." Lord Renaud leans back. Forgiveness. He repeats, as if tasting the word. That is a church matter. He lifts his chin toward the chapel windows, dark beyond the walls. And this is a household matter. In medieval life, love is rarely only love. It is property and inheritance, honor and rumor. A lord's wife is not only a person in a gown, she is the public face of his power. If she is mocked, he is mocked. If her loyalty is questioned, his authority is questioned. And if a young man reaches too close, the Lord does not simply feel jealousy, he feels threat. Lord Renaud does not strike Martin. He does something colder. He sends him away from the castle that raised him. You will leave at dawn. He says, you will go to the town priest. You will confess. You will take penance. And you will not return until I decide you are useful again. If I ever do. Martin swallows. Exile from the castle is not just embarrassment. It is hunger. It is danger on the road. It is the end of every small certainty. Still, he bows again, because obedience is the habit that keeps servants alive. When he backs out of the chamber, his hands are shaking. Upstairs, Lady Ellen is called to speak with the Lord as well. But her punishment will wear a different shape. Her room will become smaller without changing size. Her freedoms will narrow. Her servants will report more. Her visits to the chapel will become watched. And in the days ahead, she will learn a medieval truth that many women learned. The law can forgive a man's desire as a youthful mistake, while a woman's desire is treated as a stain that never washes out. Martin walks out into the cold courtyard. The stars are sharp overhead. The castle looks peaceful from a distance. All storm and order. He wants to hate it. He also wants to go back inside where it is warm. Desire can be like that, making you long for the same place that harms you. He heads toward the stables to gather his few things. A groom avoids his eyes. A cook's boy whispers and laughs. A guard watches him with a half smile. The story has already become entertainment. At Darwin, Martin leaves with a small bundle, a crust of bread, and a head full of fear. The road is quiet. Frost clings to grass. In the distance, a bell rings for morning prayer. Steady and indifferent, he walks toward the market town, because that is where the priest will be, and where forgiveness can be bought with tears, prayers, and time. The church is built of stone, like the monastery, but it smells different. Here the air carries wax and incense. Yes, but also wet wool, smoke from village chimneys, and the muddy feet of ordinary people. Near the side aisle stands a wooden confessional, a box of dark planks, carved with simple crosses. Martin waits behind a widow and a baker. No one meets his eyes. Everyone knows why he is here. In a small town, sins travel faster than carts. When it is his turn, he steps inside and pulls the curtain. The space is tight. The wood smells old. There is a thin screen, and behind it a priest clears his throat. The priest is not young. His voice is tired. The voice of a man who has heard too many secrets and still has to act surprised. Speak, he says. Martin tries to form words. For a moment he wants to confess everything the way Lady Ellen's glance felt like sunlight on winter skin, the way his heart raced, the way he imagined a touch that never happened. But medieval confession is not a place for poetry. It is a place for categories. The priest will want facts, not feelings, and that is how control works. It turns a living experience into a list. So Martin speaks in the language he has been taught. He confesses impure thoughts. He confesses bold words. He admits that he lingered where he should not have lingered. The priest asks questions, methodical, almost clinical. Did you touch her? Did you kiss her? Did you meet at night? Did you plan to dishonor your Lord? Each question is a nail, tapping into the wood of Martin's shame. No. Martin answers again and again. No. Father, the truth is simple, nothing happened. And yet everything changed. The priest pauses, as if disappointed. Then he offers a lesson, soft but firm. The devil does not need full acts. He says he needs openings. A glance becomes a dream. A dream becomes a plan. A plan becomes a fall. Martin listens, half numb. The priest assigns penance, fast for days, pray certain psalms, attend Mass each morning, work in service of the poor, and, most important, stay away from the lady and from any place where your mind might wander. The priest frames it as medicine. But Martin can feel what it really is, a leash. When Martin leaves the booth, he steps into light, colored by stained glass. Reds and blues fall across his hands. He feels smaller than he did before. Not because he is weaker, but because he has been named. He has been placed into a story that belongs to other people. Outside the church, the town is awake. Merchants call out prices. Children chase a dog. A woman laughs near a well. Life goes on as if confession is a simple routine, as ordinary as bread. And maybe for many it is. But for Martin, it is a turning point. He understands now that medieval sin is not only about God, it is also about surveillance. It is a system that teaches you to watch yourself, then teaches your neighbors to watch you too. He walks down the street and passes a notice nailed to a post. It announces a public punishment in the square at noon. Someone accused of adultery, someone to be shamed. People will come, not only for justice, but for spectacle. Martin should keep walking. He should keep his head down, yet his feet slow. The notice pulls him like a magnet, because in a world that forbids open talk of desire, the punishments become the loudest stories anyone is allowed to hear. By the time the sun climbs higher, the square begins to fill. Martin stands at the edge of the crowd. Half hidden behind a cart, he tells himself he is only curious, only trying to understand the world that just swallowed him. But another part of him knows he is here for the same reason others are here, because fear and fascination often hold hands. In the center of the square stands the stocks, freshly set up, wood oiled, iron cold. A basket of rotten vegetables waits nearby. The air smells of damp straw and cheap ale. People murmur as if waiting for a play. Martin watches the empty stocks and feels a sick heaviness in his stomach. This is what happens when private life becomes public property. A bell rings. The crowd hushes, then leans in, and in that leaning, the whole town becomes one body. Eager, tense, hungry for a story. This is where Act 1 ends. Not with romance, but with consequence, as the medieval world shows its teeth in the daylight. They bring her out with 2 guards at her elbows. She is not young, not old, just tired in the face, hair half hidden under a scarf that has slipped, Her name is not announced at first. The town prefers labels. The crier calls her an unfaithful wife, as if that is all she has ever been. The crowd reacts with a hungry noise, part outrage, part relief, because watching someone else be judged can make your own secrets feel lighter. Martin cannot see the man involved. Often you cannot. In many towns, the punishment for a husband's wandering is a fine or a warning, or nothing at all if he has friends. For a woman, the stakes rise fast. She is placed in the stocks. Wood closes around her wrists and ankles with a dull thud. Someone ties a small sign near her shoulder. The letters are rough. Martin cannot read them well, but he understands the meaning. Shame made visible. A boy throws the first turnip. It strikes the wood, not her face, and the crowd laughs anyway. Then others join. A rotten apple. A clump of mud. A cabbage leaf that slaps wetly against the platform. People throw as if they are cleaning the town of something dirty. The woman does not cry. She stares ahead, jaw tight, eyes fixed on a point above the crowd, a place where the sky is pale and calm and seems far away. A priest steps forward and begins to speak. His sermon is not long. It does not need to be. He warns of lust as if it is a fire in dry straw. He talks about marriage as a wall that keeps the village safe. He talks about women as gates that must be guarded. Martin feels his stomach twist. The words are familiar, but hearing them beside a living person in pain makes them sharper. In the crowd, Martin notices small things. A woman clutching her child too tightly. A man smiling a little too widely. A merchant's wife whispering to a friend. Eyes bright with the thrill of it. A young couple holding hands as if to prove to everyone that they are good. Shame is contagious, and so is the need to stand apart from it. The woman in the stocks speaks once. When a stone skids across the platform near her foot. Where is he? She asks. Voice hoarse. It is not a plea. It is a question meant to slice. The crowd hisses. The guard tells her to be quiet. Someone yells that she should have thought of that before. Martin feels heat in his cheeks. He thinks of Lady Ellen. Watched, caged in silk. He thinks of himself, exiled, but still breathing. He thinks of how uneven the scales are. The punishment lasts hours, but the crowd does not stay for all of it. People drift away to eat, to bargain, to live. That is another cruelty. The spectacle is exciting at first, then boring, then forgotten. The woman remains, pinned in place, while the town returns to its tasks. By late afternoon, flies hover near the basket of rot. A dog sniffs at discarded vegetables. A child, suddenly shy, drops a flower near the platform and runs away. When the guard finally opens the stocks, the woman's hands are swollen. She stands slowly, stiff as if her bones have turned to wood. No one cheers. No one apologizes. She is led away, and the square empties, leaving only footprints and the sour smell of bruised fruit. Martin walks too, but not toward home, because home has moved out of reach. He walks toward the river at the edge of town. The water is dark and slow. Reeds bent in the wind. He sits on a low stone and lets the sound of the current steady his mind. If you listen carefully, Water can be a kind of lullaby, patient and repeating. He realizes something else as well. In the Middle Ages, desire is everywhere, yet it is spoken of like a disease. People are taught to fear their own bodies, then punished for being unable to escape them. And the punishment is not only pain, it is story, it is reputation, it is the way a name becomes a warning whispered by neighbors. As dusk settles, Martin decides he cannot stay in this town, not because he is brave, but because he is tired of being a character in someone else's judgment. He will walk on to larger places where a single rumor has less power, where libraries keep records, where you can learn how these rules were made. If the world insists on calling him sinful, he wants at least to understand the language of the accusation. He stands, brushes dirt from his cloak, and looks down the road where the last light rests like a thin ribbon. Somewhere ahead, there are monasteries with dusty books, city courts with thick ledgers, and churches with confessionals that swallow secrets day after day. Somewhere ahead, there are people who have found ways to live inside the rules, and people who have been crushed by them. Martin takes a slow breath and starts walking. Behind him, the town bell rings once, then falls silent. In front of him, the road opens into night, and the next chapter waits like a door that is not yet locked. A thin moon rises above the hedges. Martin follows it like a quiet guide, one careful step after another, until the town's last candle is gone and only the road's hush remains around him. Now, night on the road is quieter than you expect, not silent, just softened, as if the world has learned to whisper. Martin walks until his legs ache, then finds a hollow near a hedgerow and rests with his cloak pulled tight. He does not sleep deeply. He drifts in and out, listening to owls, to distant hoof beats, to the slow wind combing through dead leaves. Each sound feels like a sentence from a world that does not care what he confessed. By morning, he reaches a larger town, then a larger one after that. Roofs multiply, streets narrow, voices overlap. In a city, you can be invisible even while standing in plain sight. And that invisibility can feel like mercy. Martin follows the river into the heart of the place. Barges slide past with barrels of wine and sacks of grain. On the quay, men shout, "Yoke," "Argie," then laugh as if anger is a game. The air smells of fish, smoke, and damp stone. Somewhere a bell rings, but it is only one bell among many. The church is here, yes, but it does not own every sound the way it does in a village. He finds work quickly, because hunger is a strong resume. A scrivener named Master Odo needs hands to carry bundles of parchment and sweep the corner of his shop. Odo is thin, ink-stained, and endlessly curious. He asks Martin where he is from. Martin answers carefully. He does not mention a lord or a lady. He says only that he is between places. Odo nods as if that is a normal state of being. Most people are, he says. They just pretend they are not. He hands Martin a rag and points at a shelf of ledgers. Be gentle. Those pages hold more lives than the graveyard. The ledgers are court records. Finas, dispute, wills, and complaints. The city writes everything down, because writing is power that lasts longer than memory. Martin learns to read names and dates. Then phrases that repeat like a chant: unlawful contact, suspected fornication, public indecency, scandal. The words are cold, but behind them, Martin can sense warm bodies, warm mistakes. One afternoon, Odo opens a heavy book and smiles without humor. Here, he says, tapping a line with the blunt end of a quill, a man fined for kissing his betrothed in the churchyard. Too eagerly. They said, Odo turns a page. A woman fined for bathing at dusk where someone might see her ankles. And here, a priest reprimanded for keeping a housekeeper who was suspiciously young. The city likes rules. The city also likes money. Most sins can be turned into fees. Martin listens, quietly amazed. In the village, punishment was a stage. In the city, punishment is paperwork. Both forms control the body. One does it with vegetables and shouting. The other does it with ink and debt. At night, when the shop closes, Odo sometimes takes Martin walking, not as a friend exactly, but as a guide who enjoys explaining the secret gears of the world. They pass stone churches, crowded taverns, and narrow alleys where lantern light pools like honey. Odo speaks softly, as if the city itself is a sleeping animal that might wake if startled. There is a district, Odo says one evening, where the council pretends it does not look, even as it counts coins from it. He does not name the place right away. He lets Martin guess. Then, with a small shrug, he says, the brothel street. Martin's face warms. Odo does not tease him. He only points. Over there. They wear a certain color, so everyone knows. And so everyone can pretend they are scandalized. The council licenses the houses, inspects them, taxes them. It says the purpose is to protect respectable women. It says men must have an outlet or they will cause trouble. Very practical, very holy in its own strange way. They do not go inside. They only stand at the corner. Music floats out. Thin and reedy, laughter follows. A woman leans in a doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp, watching the street like a guard. Two men pass her and make a joke. She rolls her eyes, then smiles as if she has heard every version of the same line since the first brick was laid. Martin expects the place to feel wicked. Instead, it feels ordinary, not safe, not pure, but human. People want warmth. People want to be touched. People want, sometimes, to forget their own fear. In the village, that wanting was called corruption. In the city, it is called business. Odo is careful. Though, do not romanticize it. He says, as if reading Martin's thoughts, many women here are trapped by debts. Some came by choice, some did not. The city writes rules, but rules do not always protect. They mostly protect the city. As they walk away, Martin thinks of the woman in the stocks. He thinks of Lady Ellen, watched in velvet. He thinks of how the same hunger that drives a young man to write a letter also drives councils to build districts and priests to ask questions through screens. Desire is treated as a problem, yet it is also treated as fuel. In the weeks that follow, Martin's work with the ledgers brings him stranger stories. A case of a married couple forced to kneel in the market and reconcile after accusations of wandering. A group of neighbors fined for singing obscene rhymes under a widow's window. A man arrested for dressing in his wife's cloak during a festival. His crime described as confusion of roles, as if cloth could unravel the universe. Odo explains the pattern. They fear disorder. He says, not just in beds, but in categories. If a person slips from their assigned place, the city panics, the church panics, everyone panics. Because if one rule breaks, others might follow. One rainy afternoon, a priest comes into the shop to request copies of certain records. He is polite, clean, and slightly tense, as if holding his breath. While Odo searches, the priest glances at Martin's hands, at the ink stains beginning to appear on his fingers. You read. The priest says, it is not a question. A little, Martin answers. The priest nods, then lowers his voice. Be careful what you read. He says, words can awaken things. Martin almost laughs, but he does not. He thinks of how words awakened trouble for him already. He thinks of how the priest's warning sounds less like spiritual guidance and more like fear of losing control of a story. That night, Martin dreams of the confessional booth, the thin screen, the questions. In the dream, the priest is not alone. Behind him stand scribes with ledgers, and behind the scribes stand townspeople with baskets of rotten fruit. The dream is not frightening exactly. It is simply true in a way dreams sometimes are. When Martin wakes, the city is quiet under mist. The river moves, steady as breath. Odo gives him a new task the next day. Take this packet to the cathedral archive. He says, there is a librarian there who owes me a favor. And keep your eyes open. The archive is a mirror. You will see what people hide. Martin carries the packet through streets that smell of wet stone and baking bread. The cathedral rises ahead, enormous, its windows like colored ice. Inside, candles glow, footsteps soften on worn tiles. The archive room is cooler, lined with shelves that breathe dust. The librarian is an older woman in a plain dress, hair tucked under a simple cap. She receives Odo's packet, then studies Martin with calm attention. You are new. She says, yes. Martin answers. She gestures to a bench. Sit. If you carry paper, you should learn what paper carries. She pulls out a thin volume and opens it with care. These are penitential manuals. She says, voice gentle, lists for confessors, questions to ask, answers to demand. You will notice how detailed they can be, and how little they care for tenderness. Martin reads a few lines and feels his stomach tighten. The language is dry, but the curiosity beneath it is sharp. It is as if the church, which claims to despise desire, cannot stop circling it, naming it, measuring it, turning it into a map. The librarian closes the book softly. Some scholars argue these questions were meant to protect people. She says, to guide them away from harm. Others argue they were meant to trap people in shame, so they would keep returning for relief. Both can be true at once. Martin looks up. Why show me this? He asks. The librarian's eyes soften. Because you look like someone who has been named by other mouths. She says, and because reading can give you back a piece of yourself. Outside, the city continues. A cart rattles, a door barks, a bell calls, then fades. Martin steps into the street with the archive dust still in his nose, and he feels something shift. He is still the boy who wrote a foolish letter. But he is also becoming someone who understands the machinery around him. And once you understand a machine, you start to notice its weak points, the places where it squeaks, the places where it can be slowed, the places where a quiet person might slip through without being crushed. As evening falls, Odo meets him at the door of the shop and says there is a festival beginning near the river. Masks, music, crowds, a night when rules loosen by a finger's width. Martin hesitates. Festivals can be dangerous for someone trying to disappear. But the city is also teaching him another lesson sometimes. The safest place to hide is inside the noise. He follows Odo toward the lights, and the sound of drums begins to thrum like a second heartbeat. Somewhere in that crowd, someone will laugh too loudly. Someone will kiss too boldly. Someone will confess tomorrow. And Martin, tired but awake, walks into the glow to see what story the night will tell. The festival by the river is stitched together from old saint days and simple need. Torches line the bank. Lanterns swing from ropes between houses. The water catches the light and makes the street look as if it floats. Vendors sell spiced cakes. A fiddler plays a tune that skips and returns. Adults wear half masks. And for a few hours, the city pretends that a face is optional. Martin follows Odo through the crowd and feels his shoulders loosen, then tighten again, because even joy can feel suspicious when you have been trained to fear it. A small troupe performs a rude comedy on a platform. A proud husband preaches honor while everyone can see his hypocrisy. The crowd roars, grateful for a story that says in public what daylight forbids. Martin laughs once, then bites it back, hearing the confessional questions in his head. Near the quieter end of the bank, a woman in a plain dark cloak steps beside him. Her mask is simple, painted white with no smile. She speaks without looking at him. Martin. He knows the voice at once. Isabeau, a maid from the castle, the one who used to carry linens and trade gossip in the kitchens. Her words are fast and low. I have been searching for you. She says, Lady Ellen is watched. The Lord has tightened everything. Her letters are searched. Her prayers are supervised. And the chaplain is asking questions like a man digging for bones. Martin's throat tightens. Why? He whispers. Because he wants names. Isabeau says, if he cannot find proof, he will invent it. She slips a folded note into Martin's hand. Plain wax, no crest, only a pressed mark. She wrote this. She begged me to bring it. Martin stares at the seal, afraid to break it, afraid not to. What does she want? He asks. Not a rescue. Isabeau says, voice shaking with anger. She wants you to live and to stop being convenient for them. If you stay gone, they can say anything. If you return, you can at least stop the worst story from becoming law. The river moves beside them, dark and steady. Behind them, the festival drums keep beating. But here the sound is thinner, like a heartbeat heard through cloth. Martin thinks of penitential manuals, of lists that turn longing into crime. He thinks of the woman in the stocks. He thinks of how quickly a rumour becomes a sentence. He slides the note inside his tunic, close to his chest. He does not promise out loud. Promises can be used as ropes, but he nods once, and Ysabeau's eyes soften for a moment. Be careful, she says. If you go back, the road will not be the only danger. She disappears into the crowd, a dark cloak swallowed by masks and torchlight. Martin stands still and listens to the water until the cold seeps through his boots. When he turns back toward Odo, the festival looks different. The laughter is still bright, but underneath it he can hear the city's other rhythm, the rhythm of rules returning. He walks home without dancing, the note against his heart, and a question that will not let him rest if the world is built to punish desire. What does it mean to choose courage anyway? In his rented room he sets a candle, turns the seal between his fingers, and breathes in. He still does not open it. He lets the wax hold its secret a little longer, as if delaying pain. Outside, the river keeps moving, and the city keeps pretending it sleeps, until dawn comes again. Dawn is pale and cold, and the note is still unbroken. Martin sits on the edge of his small bed, candle burned to a stub, staring at the seal. He knows that opening it will turn every thought into a path he must walk. For a long time, he simply holds it, thumb tracing the wax like a worry stone. Finally, as the city bells call, the first prayers, he presses his nail into the seal. The wax cracks softly, and the folded paper opens like breath. The letter is short. Lady Ellen's hand is careful, each word shaped as if written in a trembling room. She writes that she is safe, or at least still unpunished, that the Lord's anger has turned outward toward servants and priests. She writes that rumors travel faster than mercy. She writes that she dreams of the courtyard, of air not watched, of freedom. Then, in a line that stops him, she writes, if the truth cannot be washed away, then let it be written down, so at least it belongs to us. Martin reads that line again and again. It sounds simple, but it changes the air. To write something down in this world is to give it a kind of survival. If their names appear in their own story, even briefly, the tale cannot be fully stolen by those who judge them. For the first time since exile, Martin feels a pulse of purpose, small but steady. He copies her words into a scrap of parchment, hiding the original in the lining of his cloak. Then he walks to Odo's shop, mind already turning. He does his chores as usual, sweeping, carrying ink jars, sharpening quills. Odo notices his distraction but says nothing. By midday, Martin gathers courage and speaks. Master Odo, he says, you keep records of many things. Finesse, trades, debts. Have you ever written something not ordered by a court or a council? Odo raises an eyebrow. A private record. A truth. Martin says, something people should remember, even if power prefers they forget. Odo studies him. You sound like a man about to get himself into trouble. Perhaps, Martin says, but trouble already found me. Odo sighs and gestures toward the shelves. Every truth costs ink, and ink is not cheap, but I will not stop you from using it. Just remember, paper keeps what it is given. If you put pain on it, The pain stays. That night, Martin begins his secret task. He writes by candlelight, the flame trembling with each draught of air. He writes about Lady Ellen, about the letter, about the punishment he saw in the square. He writes without naming the town or the people, disguising them behind symbols. Because stories can live longer than witnesses, he writes until the candle dies, leaving the page smelling of smoke. The next morning, he hides the paper under a loose floorboard. It feels dangerous and clean at once, as if confession could be remade into creation. For weeks, he keeps adding to it observations from Odo's ledgers, overheard phrases, the way priests measure sin in lines of text. The writing becomes his new prayer, not to be forgiven, but to be seen. One afternoon, Odo finds him bent over the desk and asks what he is doing. Martin freezes, then answers honestly, "I am writing what people live through." Odo's mouth twitches. "Then you are writing history, though the city will not thank you for it." Outside, the air smells of rain. The city's roofs glisten. As thunder murmurs, Martin realizes the weather matches his heartfall. Uneasy, waiting to break. He asks Odo, "Do you believe there can be holiness in love that is forbidden?" Odo wipes his hands. Holiness is just a word the powerful borrow when they want to bless control. He says, "What matters is whether love brings kindness or cruelty. The rest is paperwork." That night, Martin walks to the riverbank, where festival debris still lies, broken masks, candle stubs, bits of wax. He tears a blank scrap from his notebook and writes one sentence: "No law can erase what people feel when they are kind to each other." He weighs the paper with a pebble and drops it into the water, watching it spin and vanish downstream. It feels like a quiet vow. The next morning, the shop is busier than usual. A messenger from the cathedral brings a new order. The council wants copies of moral decrees to distribute before Lent. Odo groans. They tighten the rope before the feast begins. He mutters. Martin helps stack the heavy texts. The titles blur into one another: purity, temperance, chastity. Each promises safety through fear. At the bottom of the pile, Martin finds a smaller document sealed with a bishop's mark. Odo breaks it open, scans the page, and whistles low. Ah, a directive for increased inspection of women's households, suspicion dressed as virtue. He looks at Martin. "This means your lady will be questioned again." Martin feels his blood run cold. "How soon?" Before Easter. "Likely." Odo says, "The church likes a stage." That evening, Martin opens the letter from Lady Ellen once more. The paper has softened with handling. He reads her line about truth again. If she is to be accused, he thinks, then the least he can do is ensure her side is not erased. He copies the story cleanly, adds his own name, and hides it in a stack of Odo's discarded drafts. He does not tell anyone. It feels like planting a seed. Weeks pass. Rumors trickle in with travelers. A noble estate under inquiry. A chaplain dismissed. A woman confined to her chambers. Nothing certain. Everything half heard. Martin listens. Silent. He works. Writes. And waits. Then, one grey afternoon, a familiar voice behind him says his name. He turns, startled. It is Isabeau again. Cloak soaked with rain. She looks thinner, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. They sent word. She says, the Lord fell ill. Sudden fever. The chaplain pressed for confession. In his delirium he named names, yours among them. The bishop's men will come? Martin's mind races. How much time? Hours? Maybe less. She says, I rode ahead. Odo hears them from the back room and steps forward. Go. He says simply, take nothing you cannot carry. Martin grabs his cloak, his notes, the letter. He hesitates, but Odo grips his shoulder. Leave the rest. Words are lighter than fear. They slip through side streets, rain muffling their footsteps. At the edge of the city, Martin looks back once. The towers fade into mist. Ahead, the open road gleams with puddles. Behind them, bells begin to ring, not for prayer, but alarm. The sound is heavy, relentless, like judgment waking up. They follow the river north, where trade roads lead toward other towns, toward monasteries that keep books instead of prisoners. Each step feels both like escape and exile. Isabeau read beside him, cloak flapping like a torn flag. By nightfall, they reach the small barn and shelter inside. The air smells of hay and wet wood. Martin finally asks, why risk this for me? She shrugs, because I am tired of watching kind people vanish. He wants to thank her, but the words come out as a breath instead. They sit in silence. The rain drums softly on the roof. Somewhere outside, an owl calls. Its voice, the same shape as distance. Martin sleeps little. He dreams of Lady Ellen writing in secret, of ink staining her fingers, of the way fear and courage share a heartbeat. When he wakes, dawn is thin and cold, and Isabeau is already saddling her horse. Where now? He asks. North. She says, there's a priory that takes in travellers. If they ask who you are, say you copy texts. Monks respect ink more than faces. As they ride, the sun finally breaks through clouds, turning puddles into mirrors. Martin watches their reflections ripple and thinks, for the first time in months, that he is not alone. The wind smells of thawing earth, and somewhere ahead the world feels wide enough for more than punishment. They pass milestones, small villages, then forests where birds chatter in the high branches. The road becomes rougher, but also freer, and as the trees close around them, Martin feels the weight of the letter and the hidden pages pressing against his chest. He does not yet know if the story will save anyone, but he knows it will be told, and sometimes in a world built on silence. That is the beginning of a revolution, quiet and patient as paper drying by candlelight. By the time they reach the priory, their clothes are crusted with dust and their stomachs ache from hunger. The building rises from the fog like a memory of safety, low stone walls. A gate that groans when opened. A bell tower leaning slightly, as if tired of keeping time. A lay brother greets them, cautious but kind. Travellers, he asks. Martin nods. The scriptor. He adds, remembering Isabeau's advice. The brother nods again, motioning them inside. The courtyard smells of bread and wet straw. Chickens peck near the well. A dog lifts its head and decides they are not worth barking at. In the refectory, they are given soup, rough bread, and a corner to sit. Martin eats slowly, grateful and guilty at once. Every kindness reminds him how much fear still follows behind. After the meal, an older monk with silver hair approaches. You copy texts. He says, "Would you care to see our library?" His voice is calm, but his eyes are sharp, the eyes of a man who measures strangers by the way they hold a quill. Martin follows him through corridors that smell of dust and ink. The library is small compared to the city's archive, but it feels alive. Candles burn low beside rows of vellum. Margins bloom with tiny drawings faces. Veen, animals. The monk watches Martin's expression and smiles faintly. You see, even holy men need to play. Martin nods, his chest tight. I used to copy records for a scrivener in the city. Then you know how memory works. The monk says, ink lasts longer than breath. That is why the church fears it and needs it at the same time. Martin glances toward the window, where light spills across a desk. May I write? He asks. The monk tilts his head. Write what? Truth? Martin says, what people live through. The monk studies him for a long moment, then gestures toward a corner. There is ink, there is parchment. We will pretend I did not hear your subject. Days pass quietly. Martin copies the priory's psalters by daylight and adds his own words at night. Isabeau helps by bringing scraps of parchment, bits of news, and food when he forgets to eat. She speaks little of the past, but her hand shakes sometimes when she lights the candle. He never asks why. In his secret pages, Martin writes about what he has seen, the stocks, the sermons, the fines, the letters. He writes about how control hides behind care, how the church teaches fear and calls it virtue. He writes about women watched, men broken, and how even silence can be rebellion when it refuses to repeat the lies. The words grow faster, sharper, as if the ink itself wants to speak. One night, while he writes, the monk returns unexpectedly. Martin freezes. The monk steps closer, reads a few lines, then closes the book gently. You are brave, he says quietly, or foolish. In this house, both are dangerous. Martin starts to apologize, but the monk raises a hand. Do not stop. Only understand what you build. Words can be fire as well as light. The next morning, soldiers arrive at the priory. Their cloaks bear the Lord's crest. Martin feels his throat close. Isabeau grips his arm. The prior meets the soldiers at the gate, calm as stone, but Martin can hear the questions through the courtyard. A fugitive, a servant named Martin, accused of slander and sedition. The prior hesitates, only a heartbeat. There is no one here by that name. He says, his voice does not tremble. You may search if you wish, but books are poor company for traitors. The soldiers look uneasy, reluctant to handle sacred walls. Still, they search the dormitory, the stables, the storehouse. Martin and Isabeau hide in the library behind a curtain of hanging cloth. The air smells of dust and ink. Martin can hear boots on stone, then the clink of armor, then silence. His pulse is loud enough to be prayer. After an hour, the soldiers leave. The prior enters, face pale but steady. You must go. He says they will return with permission next time. Isabeau gathers their packs. Martin reaches for the manuscript. The prior stops him. Leave it. He says, if you carry it, it will condemn you. If it stays, it might live. Martin hesitates. You will keep it. I will hide it. The prior says, perhaps someone will read it when the world grows less afraid. They part before dawn. The road north curves through forest and mist. Isabeau read beside him. Silente, her hood pulled low. For the first time, Martin feels the weight of loss heavier than the weight of fear. Behind them lies everything they built in words. Ahead lies only rumor and cold wind. By evening they reach an abandoned chapel half buried in ivy. The roof leaks, but it shelters them from rain. They light a small fire. The flames turn the walls gold, revealing faded saints with patient eyes. Martin stares at them and says, do you think truth can survive without paper? Isabeau looks at him across the fire. It already has. She says, you carried it here. They sit in silence for a long time, the kind that feels like understanding. Outside, the rain eases. The air smells of wet grass and smoke. Martin lies down, cloak over his shoulders, and listens to the wind through the broken roof. In his dreams, he is back at the Priory Library. The monk's voice echoes, ink lasts longer than breath. But this time, Martin answers, so does memory. When he wakes, dawn glows pale through ivy. Isabeau is still asleep, her face soft in the light. For the first time in months, he feels something like peace. They travel farther north, following roads that twist between fields and ruins. In some villages, people still whisper of lords and punishments. In others, they talk of plague, of hunger, of taxes. Everywhere, the same pattern, fear wrapped in faith. Obedience mistaken for safety. At night, Martin begins to tell stories by voice instead of ink. Around small fires, he speaks of unnamed women who defied silence, of servants who walked away, of priests who doubted their own sermons. He changes details, invents names, hides himself inside them. The listeners nod, sometimes laugh, sometimes wipe their eyes. No one asks if the tales are true. Truth, Martin learns, can survive as sound when paper is gone. Weeks pass. The road becomes mountains. The air grows thin. They find shelter in a stone hut used by shepherds in summer. Snow dusts the grass. Isabeau coughs, weak from cold. Martin tends the fire, feeds her broth, prays in words he no longer fully believes. He knows the world will not suddenly become kind. But he also knows that stories can outlive cruelty if someone keeps telling them. On the third night, she takes his hand. When you speak, she says, I see her, the lady. I see all of them. Do not stop. He squeezes her fingers. I will not. When dawn comes, the sky clears. The mountains shine like glass. Martin steps outside, breath steaming, and looks toward the horizon. Somewhere far below, cities wake, priests preach, and punishments resume. But here, in the thin air, the noise cannot reach him. He opens his cloak and lets the wind touch the folded page, he still carries Lady Ellen's letter. The one line that began it all: if truth cannot be washed away, let it be written down. He whispers it once, and the wind carries it away. It is enough. The paper, the ink, the memory, all part of the same long defiance. And as he starts down the mountain path, his footsteps leave no mark. The snow will keep. But the story follows, unseen and alive, waiting for the next voice to speak it aloud. The mountain air stays sharp for days, then slowly softens as Martin and Ysabeau descend into lower valleys. Pine gives way to bare oaks. Snow becomes mud again. The world feels heavier here, closer to fields, markets, and the restless ache of people living under rules they did not write. They reach a riverside town where barges drift past like dark animals. In the evening, lamps glow behind shutters. A bell calls the faithful to prayer, and the sound makes Martin's shoulders tense, even though no one is calling his name. He and Isabeau find a corner in an inn stable, trading a small copper for hay and a bucket of water. Inside the inn, voices rise and fall like waves. Martin listens from the doorway while pretending to mend a strap. The talk is the same kind of talk he has heard everywhere, but with new urgency. A fever is spreading in the south. Someone says, a swelling sickness, black marks on skin, coughing that does not stop. Another man spits into the fire and says God is angry again, as if God is always angry and never tired. Later, a tired traveller mentions a noble estate under investigation. The woman confined, the chaplain dead. Martin's breath catches. He asks softly, as if he does not care, which estate. The traveller names it, and Martin feels the world tilt. It is Lady Ellen's place. The rumour is that she has been ordered to appear in the city before the bishop's court. Isabeau sees his face and already knows. You want to go back, she says, not accusing him, only naming the truth. I left her behind. Martin whispers, I ran, I wrote, I hid Paige, but she is the one who will stand alone in a room full of men who speak in laws. Isabeau si ona crate, pulling her cloak tighter. If you go back, they may hang you, she says, or worse, they may make you live. Branded, broken. Martin looks at his hands, ink stained, even after months of travel. If I do nothing, I will carry that silence forever. They do not decide quickly. They sit with the choice like a heavy blanket, letting it settle. Outside, rain begins again, gentle at first, then steady. The sound is oddly soothing, a soft insistence. Martin thinks of Lady Ellen's sentence, the one line that felt like a small candle in a wide dark. He thinks of paper hidden under floorboards and behind curtains, of words that might live after bodies fail. He thinks of how fear wins by making people separate. In the morning, they go. The road back south is crowded with carts and pilgrims, not holy in the way sermons pretend, but human, hungry, restless, hoping to be spared by distance. Some travel toward shrines, some away from them. Some carry herbs, some carry children. Many carry rumors. Every mile has a different story, but the same heartbeat under it. They reach the outskirts of the city at dusk. The walls loom familiar, and Martin's stomach twists as if his body remembers punishment better than his mind. Smoke rises from chimneys. Somewhere, a choir is practicing, and the notes drift over the rooftops like mist. For a moment, the city looks almost gentle. Martin knows better. But the illusion is part of how it works. Isabeau leads him through back streets and alleyways. If anyone asks, she murmurs, "You are my cousin from the north. You speak little because your throat was injured." Martin nods, grateful, ashamed, determined. They find Odo's shop shuttered. The signboard is gone. The window is boarded. A neighbor sweeping the lane looks at them with wary eyes. Martin asks, "The scrivener, Master Odo, where is he?" The neighbor's broom pauses. "Dark," she says. Questioned, they said he copied dangerous words. Her eyes flick to the cathedral towers. People disappear into those stones and come out quieter, if they come out at all. Martin's chest tightens. He wants to run, but he forces himself to breathe. He cannot save everyone. He can only try to save the truth from being buried. They slip into a small chapel near the market where candles burn before painted saints. In the corner, an old woman sells wax. She looks at Martin and then at Isabeau and says, very softly, "You are not the first to come here with fear in your pockets." Isabeau buys 2 candles. They light them and sit in a back pew, not praying so much as hiding in the shape of prayer. Martin watches the flames. He thinks about the bishop's court, about Lady Ellen standing alone. He thinks of Odo taken for ink. The anger in him rises, but he tries to hold it gently, like a hot stone you can carry if you do not squeeze it too hard. Night deepens. The chapel empties. Isabeau leans close. "If we want to reach her," she whispers, "we need to know where they keep her before court." Martin remembers the castle's side corridors, the convent's hidden doors, the way power loves to tuck things out of sight. The bishop's guest house. He says they keep noble witnesses there. They move through the city like shadows, staying near walls, listening to footsteps, avoiding torchlight. The streets smell of wet stone and old smoke. Somewhere, a door barks, then stops. The silence after feels like someone holding a breath. At the guest house gate, a guard stands under an awning. Isabeau steps forward with a basket of bread she has bought. Posture humble. Eyes down. For the kitchens, she says. Donation. The guard grunts and waves her in. Martin follows with his head lowered, heart pounding. Inside, the hallway's warm, lined with tapestries that show saints crushing demons underfoot. Martin thinks of how often the church paints desire as a monster. He wonders what it does to the people who believe that every human longing must be slain. They find the kitchens, then a stairwell. Isabeau listens at a door, then nods. They climb, one step at a time. At the top, a corridor opens into quiet. The candle burns in a wall sconce. A woman's cough echoes faintly from behind a door. Isabeau point. There, she mouths. Martin's hands shake as he approaches. He knocks once. Soft. Silence. He knocks again. Softer. A voice answers. Tired but sharp. Who is there? Martin swallows. A friend, he whispers. A name you once wrote to. The latch clicks. The door opens a crack, and Lady Ellen's eye appears in the gap. Vari, bright. Then she sees him, and for a moment her face does something like breaking and mending at the same time. She pulls him inside quickly, bolting the door. The room is small, better furnished than a cell, but still a cage. Ellen's hair is braided tight. Her hands are raw, as if she has been washing too often. She looks at Isabeau and gives a small nod, as if she has learned not to be surprised by allies. You came back. Ellen says. Her voice is quiet, but it trembles at the edge. I should not have left. Martin says. Ellen's mouth twists into a tired smile. You left because you are alive. That is not a sin. Martin takes out the folded pages he has carried, his notes, his story, the letter. I wrote, he says, because you asked for truth to belong to us. Ellen touches the pages with careful fingers. They will call this slander. She says, they already called you a sinner. Martin answers, they will call anything you do a sin if it helps them keep control. Isabeau watches the door. We do not have long. She whispers, Ellen sits, breathing slowly. Tomorrow, she says, I stand before the court. They want me to confess, not just to what happened, but to wanting it. They want me to say I enjoyed it, so they can turn my body into a lesson. Martin feels heat behind his eyes. He forces himself to speak softly, as if gentleness itself is a shield. Then do not give them your joy. He says, give them your truth. Ellen looks at him. Truth is dangerous. She says, so is silence. He replies, they make a plan, simple and risky. Martin will not speak in court. He has no standing. But words can travel through other mouths. In the morning, as the crowd gathers, Isabeau will move among them, whispering, passing small copied lines from Martin's pages to people who can read. And if the court tries to make Ellen's story one thing, filthy, shameful, small, then outside the court, another story will already be growing. Like ivy on stone, before dawn, they part. Ellen presses the original letter back into Martin's hand. Keep it. She says, if I vanish, let at least one sentence survive. Her fingers linger on his for a heartbeat. And in that touch, Martin feels everything the church fears, not lust, but tenderness. Martin and Isabeau slip out again. The city is dark, but the cathedral stands awake, its windows faintly lit. Bells toll once, low and heavy, and the sound rolls over rooftops like a slow warning. When morning comes, the square before the bishop's hall fills with people. Some come for justice, some for entertainment, some because boredom is a hunger too. Martin stands at the edge, hood up, watching. Isabeau moves through the crowd like water, quick and quiet. In her hand are scraps of parchment with Martin's careful script. She does not shout. She does not provoke. She simply gives people words and lets them do what people always do with words, carry them, repeat them, change them, make them live. The doors open. Lady Ellen is led inside. Martin cannot follow. He waits in the square where a fountain trickles. The sound is gentle, absurdly peaceful. He focuses on it, on the steady drip, to keep his mind from racing into worst endings. After what feels like hours, the doors open again. A murmur spreads. Faces turn. Some look pleased, some disappointed, some thoughtful, as if they have been forced to remember that the accused is a person. Elin emerges, pale but upright. She does not look at the crowd. She looks straight ahead, as if she is walking through a narrow tunnel of air. Behind her, priests talk in low voices. A guard grips her arm, then loosens his hold when she does not resist. Isabeau finds Martin and grips his sleeve. They did not condemn her to death. She whispers, "Not today." Martin's lungs release a breath he did not know he was holding. What did they do? Penance. Isabeau says, confinement, and a donation to the cathedral. Of course, they want to bleed her slowly. Martin watches Ellen disappear into a waiting carriage. Relief comes, but it is not clean. The system still wins something. It always demands payment. Then something shifts in the crowd. Two women near the fountain are reading one of Isabeau's scraps. Lips moving silently. One shakes her head. Not in disgust, but in recognition. A man beside them mutters, "That is not what the priest said." Another says, "Maybe the priest does not know everything." It is small, it is quiet, but it is movement. Martin steps back into the alley shadow and feels his heart steady. He has not overturned the world. He has not rescued Ellen into freedom, but he has placed a crack in the wall, and cracks are where air enters. Cracks are where seeds find space. As evening falls, the city lamps flicker on. One by one, Martin and Isabeau walk toward the river, away from the square. Behind them, the cathedral bells call people to confession, to obedience, to the old story. But in pockets of the city, a new story now exists too, carried in whispered lines and remembered phrases. Martin touches the letter inside his cloak and thinks, with a tired kind of hope, that sometimes survival is not a triumph. Sometimes it is simply refusing to let your truth be spoken only by those who punish it. They do not sleep much that night. They sit by the river where the current carries moonlight in pieces. Isabeau tells Martin an old story her mother used to tell when storms shook the roof. Water remembers every footstep but never holds a grudge, because it is too busy moving. Martin listens and lets the thought settle in him, moving, not fixing everything, just moving on. Near midnight, a small carriage rolls along the quay and stops in a darker patch of street. Lady Ellen steps down, wrapped in a plain cloak, guarded but not chained. Her face looks thinner, yet her eyes are steady. "You were heard," she whispers, not in the hall, outside it. Martin wants to apologize again, but Elin lifts a hand. "Save your sorrow," she says. "It is heavy, and it does not help me breathe. Give me something lighter." So he gives her a promise, instead practical. "I will keep writing." He says, "I will keep copying. I will give people a way to see themselves without shame." Ellen nods once. "Then my confinement will not be the end of me." She says, "It will simply be a door I walk through slowly." When she returns to the carriage, she leaves Martin with one more quiet instruction. if the fever reaches this city, she says, people will cling to fear again. Write a story that teaches them to cling to each other instead. The wheels fade into the dark. Martin closes his eyes and listens to the river, letting its hush carry him forward into whatever comes next. Dawn comes pale and wet, as if the sky is rinsing itself. Martin wakes to the smell of river fog and bread. He and Isabeau have found a narrow room above a baker's shop, where warmth rises through the floorboards like a slow sigh. For a few minutes, he forgets the city's danger and only hears the steady rhythm of kneading below. A human sound that feels older than any law. Then the bells begin. Not the gentle single toll of a prayer hour, but a frantic pattern. One tower answering another. People in the street look up as if the air itself has spoken. Someone shouts that a cart has arrived at the southern gate with bodies already stiff. Someone else says the fever has crossed the river roads. The rumor that traveled like smoke is now aflame. By noon, the market is half empty. Sellers pull cloths over their stalls. Mothers grip children's hands and move quickly. Priests stand at corners with bowls of holy water. Sprinkling, as if drops, can stop a sickness that rides inside lungs. A procession forms. Men carrying a painted icon while chanting for mercy. Their voices echo down the lane. And Martin feels the old fear in those notes. The fear that makes people want a single answer even when the truth is complicated. Isabeau returns from the square with her cheeks flushed from cold and worry. They are closing doors. She says, and they are blaming someone already. Not the rats, not the filth, not the cramped houses. They are blaming women. They say the city must be purified. Martin sits on the edge of the bed, hands clenched. They will use the fever to tighten every chain. He says, yes. Isabeau answers, and they will call it salvation. That afternoon, they hear that the bishop has ordered extra patrols. Strangers are questioned. Beggars are driven away from church steps. In the confusion, power moves like a knife in a crowd, cutting where it wants. Martin thinks of Lady Ellen's warning by the river. He thinks of her instruction, write a story that teaches people to cling to each other instead of clinging to fear. So he writes. He writes at the small table by the window while the baker's wife naps in a chair. Exhausted from feeding the neighborhood, Martin keeps his hood up, keeps his face turned from the street, but his hand moves steadily. The words are not a sermon and not an accusation. They are a witness. He writes about the body as a gift, not a stain. He writes about kindness as a holy act, even when it is not performed inside stone walls. He writes about sickness as a reason to care, not a reason to hunt. Isabeau reads over his shoulder and nods. This will make some angry. She says, it should. Martin replies softly, but it should also make some feel less alone. They cannot make many copies alone. Ink is scarce, paper costly, so they do what people have always done when resources are thin. They split the work. Martin writes one page at a time. Isabeau carries those pages to different hands, a widow who can copy fast, a student who once studied Latin and still remembers how letters sit on a line, a merchant's clerk who hates the bishop but loves the city. They do not meet in groups. They do not make speeches. They build a net from small knots. Outside, the fever grows. A neighbor's husband coughs blood. A child in the next street stops breathing in the night. The baker's wife gives bread to anyone who knocks. then cries quietly into her apron when she thinks no one sees. Martin helps where he can. He carries buckets. He washes cloths. He sits with the sick and speaks gently, not of punishment, but of breath. He tells them to drink, to rest, to keep their lips wet. He tells them they are not filthy for being afraid. On the third day, a guard comes to the baker's shop. Martin feels his stomach drop, but the guard does not look for him. The guard is pale and sweating. "My mother," he says, voice breaking. "She cannot stand. The priest says it is God's will, but I need her to live." Isabeau steps forward without hesitation. Where, she asks. They follow the guard to a cramped room behind a tanner's yard. The smell is sharp, but Isabeau does not flinch. Martin kneels beside the old woman, who is burning with fever. He remembers the herbs the apothecary once showed him, the simple ones that can soothe even if they cannot cure. He makes a cool compress. He whispers calm words. The guard watches, ashamed and grateful at once. When they leave, the guard presses something into Isabeau's hand, a small ring of keys. "I cannot be seen helping you," he whispers, "but I can open doors." That night, Isabeau turns the keys in her palm. "Doors," she says, "like Ailen's door, like Odo's door." Martin's heart beats faster. He has been trying not to think of Odo, because guilt can drown you if you let it. But now guilt becomes a direction. Where would they keep him, he asks. Isabeau thinks, the cellar under the bishop's hall, she says, or the old granary by the cathedral. They use it when the city needs a place to hide its own cruelty. They wait until the street's quiet. The fever has made even the night guards less vigilant. People stay behind doors, praying, coughing, holding each other. The city's usual noise has softened into a hush, like a blanket pulled up over fear. They move to the granary first. The building is squat and dark, with a smell of damp grain. A single lantern burns by the door. Isabeau tests one key, then another. The lock clicks. They slip inside. The interior is colder than outside. Their footsteps echo. Rats scurry in the corners. Martin's stomach turns, but he keeps moving, one breath at a time. At the back, a staircase leads down. In the cellar, a row of makeshift cells has been built from boards and iron bars. Faces look up from the gloom, eyes wide, some pleading, some blank. Martin's throat tightens as he searches each face. Then he hears it, the scratch of a quill against paper. It is a sound so ordinary it almost makes him laugh. Ordinary, and therefore miraculous. He follows it to a corner cell, where a man sits on the floor with a scrap of parchment on his knee, writing by the thin light that slips through a crack. Odo looks older, thinner, but his eyes are still sharp. Odo, Odo. Martin whispers. Odo's head snaps up. For a moment he stars, as if his mind cannot accept the shape of Martin. Then he exhales slowly. I knew you would return. He says, voice rough. Writers are stubborn. They circle back. Martin's hands shake as he fits a key into the lock. It turns. The door opens with a soft groan. Odo stands, swaying, and Isabeau steadies him. They took my shop. Odo says, they took my ink, but they could not take my habit. He nods at the parchment. I have been copying prayers for the men in the other cell. Because even in a cage, people want to hold something. We are getting you out. Isabeau says. They lead him up the stairs and into the night. No alarm sounds. The city is too busy being sick to notice one old scrivener slipping into shadow. Back in the baker's room, Odo drinks broth in slow sips. He looks at Martin's new pages and then at Isabeau's bundles of copies. You have been busy, he says. We had to be. Martin answers. They are telling people to fear each other. I am trying to give them another choice. Odo nods, then coughs into his sleeve. Be careful, he says. In times of plague, truth can spread faster than fever, and the powerful will try to burn it. The next morning, the bishop orders a public rite of repentance on the cathedral steps. The crowd gathers, desperate for a ritual that promises safety. Martin watches from a side street, hood low. He sees priests holding censers, smoke rising like a curtain. He sees men with whips for self-flagellation, turning pain into spectacle. And then he sees something else in the bishop's hand, one of Martin's copied pages. Crumpled, the bishop lifts it high and calls it poison. He says it tempts people away from obedience. He says it insults God. He says it will be punished. The crowd shifts, uneasy. Some cross themselves. Some look hungry for a villain to blame. Martin feels his pulse in his ears. Then, from the back of the crowd, a woman speaks. Her voice is not loud, but it is clear. My sister died yesterday. She says, not because she read a page, because no one brought her water. A man beside her adds, we need bread, not blame. Another voice, younger, says, if God is testing us, then let the test be whether we help. The bishop's face tightens. He raises his hands, trying to reclaim the moment. But the crowd is no longer one body. It is many bodies, each with its own fear, its own grief, its own stubborn spark. Martin looks at Isabeau. She is watching too, eyes bright. Your words are walking without you now. She whispers. Odo's hand rests on Martin's shoulder, steadying him. This is how it happens. He says, not with one dramatic victory, with small refusals, repeated. That evening, a message arrive, carried by a servant who does not give his name. It is a folded strip of paper with one sentence, in Lady Ellen's hand I am confined, but I am not erased. Martin reads it twice and presses it to his chest. The sentence is not a rescue, but it is a heartbeat. As days pass, the fever takes more and then, slowly, begins to loosen. The city learns hard lessons. Some families are broken, some neighbors become strangers. But in some streets, people remember the pages. They remember the line about clinging to each other. They share broth. They leave water at doors. They wash cloths for the sick. Small mercies, ordinary as breath, when the worst seems to have passed. Martin and Isabeau prepare to leave again. Not because they're defeated, but because staying would make them easy targets once the city's panic sharpens back into strict control. Odo will travel with them. He says he is tired of stone walls. He wants open roads. Before they go, Martin walks alone at dawn to the river. The city is quiet. The water moves on, remembering every footstep and holding no grudge. Martin thinks of the boy he was, kneeling in cold chapel shadows, believing desire was a stain. He thinks of the man he is now, who has seen that tenderness can be a kind of courage. He touches Lady Ellen's sentence in his pocket and whispers a promise into the mist. I will keep you in the story, he says, not as a caution, but as a truth. Then he turns back to where Isabeau and Odo wait with their bundles of pages, and together they walk toward the road that leads away from the cathedral's towers, toward a life that will never be simple, but can still be honest. On the first night, outside the walls, they camp beneath bare trees. Isabeau builds a small fire, just enough to warm hands and boil water. Odo watches the flames as if he's memorizing their shapes. Martin lays out the day's copies, checking that the ink has dried. Each page is a small raft, ready for other hands. As the fire settles into coals, Isabeau hums a simple tune without words. It does not demand anything. It only fills the dark with something kind. Odo clears his throat. When I was young, he says, I believed a book was a wall. Now I think a book is a door. It opens, and then it asks you to step through. He looks at Martin. You step through. That is why you are afraid, and why you are free. In the days that follow, they move from village to village, never staying long. Where fear still lingers, they offer practical help first. Water, clean cloth, a steady presence, and words only after hands have done their work. One evening, on a quiet road bordered by hedges, a carriage slows beside them. The driver lifts a lantern in a soft signal, then rides on, leaving a single passenger to step down. Lady Ellen stands there in travel clothes, unguarded, her hood drawn low. I walk through my door. She says calmly, not quickly, but I walked. They do not make a scene. They simply stand close enough to feel that the space between them is no longer a prison. Ellen looks at the bundles of pages and nods. Keep going. She says, let the story be bigger than the court ever was. When night comes again, Martin lies back and looks up at the stars, letting his thoughts loosen. The sky is wide, the road is long, but a kinder future can begin with one careful sentence, passed from hand to hand. They travel with ordinary sounds, cartwheels, wind and dry grass, the soft clink of Odo's inkpot wrapped in cloth. Some mornings they wake to birdsong, some to rain tapping the canvas. On the hardest days, they say very little, letting silence be a shelter. On easier days, Isabeau tells small stories, and Ellen laughs quietly, as if she is practicing joy again. Martin keeps writing, not to fight the dark with shouting, but to place steady lanterns along the road. No one speaks of victory. They speak of warmth, water, and names remembered. And that is enough. Now, good night.